You're sitting there wondering why she doesn't look at you the same way anymore, why the warmth left, why conversations feel like negotiations, why her eyes don't light up when you walk into a room, and you've probably tried things, being nicer, doing more, explaining yourself better, maybe even backing off completely, but none of it worked. Because you've been solving the wrong problem. You think respect is something you lose in a moment, in an argument, in a mistake, but that's not how it happens. Respect doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes, slowly, quietly, through 1,000 tiny moments where you chose comfort over conviction, where you bent when you should have stood, where you performed instead of existed. And now you're here, trying to reverse engineer something you never fully understood in the first place. Let me tell you what nobody wants to hear. She didn't stop respecting you because you failed at something external. She stopped respecting you because you stopped respecting yourself. And she felt it before you even noticed. Women don't lose attraction to difficulty or challenge or even conflict. They lose attraction to inconsistency, to weakness disguised as flexibility, to men who shapeshift depending on the emotional temperature of the room. You became unpredictable in the worst way. Not exciting, but unstable. Not mysterious, but unclear. And that uncertainty, that lack of center, that's what killed the respect. If this hits differently, if you're tired of surface-level advice that sounds good but changes nothing, then subscribe. Not because I need you to, but because you're making a choice right now about the kind of information you let into your life. You're either committed to the truth even when it's uncomfortable, or you're committed to comfort even when it's killing you. Choose one. Here's the core issue. Most men think respect is about what they do. It's not. It's about who they are when nobody's watching. It's about the internal operating system that runs quietly beneath every decision, every reaction, every word. You can't fake that. You can perform for a while, sure. You can say the right things, make the right gestures, play the role. But eventually the performance cracks, and what she sees underneath is what determines everything. If there's nothing there, no backbone, no boundaries, no belief system that holds even when she tests it, then respect becomes impossible. Not because she's cruel, but because respect requires something solid to land on. You lost her respect the moment you started managing her emotions instead of managing yourself. The moment you started calculating your responses based on what would keep the peace rather than what was actually true. Every time you swallowed your honest opinion to avoid conflict, you taught her that your words don't mean anything. Every time you apologized for things you didn't actually believe you did wrong, you taught her that your apologies are just tools for de-escalation, not expressions of genuine accountability. Every time you changed your plans, your preferences, your personality to fit her mood, you taught her that you don't actually have a core. You're just a mirror, and nobody respects a mirror. Here's what that looks like in real time. She says something that bothers you, something dismissive or disrespectful. And instead of addressing it calmly and directly, you either explode in defensiveness or you swallow it and pretend it didn't happen. Both are fear responses. Both communicate the same thing. You're not in control of yourself. The explosion says, I can't handle discomfort without losing my composure. The silence says, I can't handle confrontation without losing your approval. Either way, she learns that you're reactive, not responsive. That you're governed by emotion, not principle, and that makes you unsafe, not physically, emotionally. She can't trust that you'll hold the center when life gets hard, because you can't even hold it during a Tuesday evening disagreement. The cost of this is almost impossible to overstate, because once respect is gone, everything else becomes transactional. Affection becomes something she gives when you've earned enough points. Intimacy becomes a reward system instead of a shared experience. Conversations become strategy sessions where both of you are trying to avoid triggering the other. You stop being partners and start being roommates who occasionally negotiate physical contact. And the worst part? You feel it. You feel the distance. But instead of understanding why it's there, you just try harder at the same broken strategies. More flowers, more compliments, more attempts to prove your value. And every single one of them makes it worse because they're all coming from the same place. Fear of losing her, and she can smell that fear from across the room. Let me paint you a picture of what the opposite looks like. There's a man who walks into his home after a long day, and the energy doesn't shift based on his partner's mood. He's present, he's warm, but he's not performing. If she's upset, He doesn't panic and start trying to fix it immediately. He doesn't take it personally. He asks what's wrong, he listens, and if it's something he can help with, he helps. If it's not, he gives her space without making it about him. He doesn't need constant validation that he's doing okay because his sense of self doesn't depend on her moment-to-moment emotional weather. When she tests him, and she will, because testing is how people confirm that the ground beneath them is solid, he doesn't fail by getting defensive or by collapsing into agreeability. He stays calm. He stays consistent. He doesn't bend on things that matter to him, and he doesn't dig in on things that don't. He knows the difference, and because of that, she trusts him. Not because he's perfect, but because he's predictable in the right way. She knows who he is, and that knowledge is where respect lives. This man doesn't avoid conflict. He doesn't chase it either. He just doesn't let it define him. When there's a disagreement, he states his perspective clearly, without hostility and without apology. He doesn't need to win. He doesn't need her to admit she's wrong. He just needs to be honest. And if she's upset by that honesty, he doesn't rush to smooth it over. He lets her feel what she feels. He trusts that she's an adult who can handle her own emotions. And paradoxically, that's what makes her feel safest with him, because he's not trying to control her inner world. He's just managing his own. And that self-governance, that quiet self-respect, is magnetic in a way that neediness and people-pleasing never will be. So how do you become that? How do you rebuild respect when it's already gone? First, you have to accept that you can't force it. You can't negotiate it. You can't convince her through words that you're different now. Words are weightless. She's heard them before. What matters is sustained behavioral change over time. And that change has to start with you, for you, regardless of whether she notices or responds. This is not a performance for her benefit. This is a reclamation of yourself. Start by identifying every place in your life where you've been operating from fear instead of principle. Where have you been shape-shifting? Where have you been saying yes when you meant no? Where have you been avoiding confrontation not because it wasn't necessary, but because you were afraid of the discomfort? Write it down if you have to, because until you see the pattern clearly, you'll keep repeating it. And once you see it, the work becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. You start telling the truth, not the hostile, aggressive version of truth that's designed to hurt, the calm, clear version that's designed to be accurate. You start saying no when you mean no. You start having the uncomfortable conversations instead of letting resentment build. You start making decisions based on what's right, not what's easy. This will feel unnatural at first. It will feel selfish. It will feel like you're risking the relationship, and maybe you are. But here's the thing. The relationship you're in right now, the one where she doesn't respect you, where intimacy is dead, where every interaction feels like walking on eggshells, that relationship is already over. You're just still living in its corpse. So the risk isn't whether you'll lose something. The risk is whether you'll stay stuck in this half-alive version of connection, or whether you'll have the courage to become someone worth respecting again, even if that means she walks away. Because if she walks away from the real you, the centered you, the version of you that has boundaries and beliefs and self-respect, then she wasn't the right person anyway. And you'll have saved yourself years of slow, suffocating compromise. But here's what usually happens instead. You start changing. You start showing up differently. You stop chasing her approval. You stop managing her emotions. You start living like someone who has options, not because you're playing games, but because you genuinely remember that you do. You start investing in yourself, your health, your goals, your friendships, your purpose. And something interesting happens. She notices, not immediately, but over weeks, over months, she starts to feel the shift. You're not as available. Not in a petty, withdrawn way, but in a busy, engaged with life way. You're not as reactive. You don't take her bait anymore. You don't collapse when she's upset. You don't explode when she's critical. You just stay steady. And that steadiness, that quiet self-possession, starts to create a vacuum. She starts to wonder what changed. She starts to test you more to see if it's real. And when you pass those tests, not by trying to pass them, but by simply being consistent, respect starts to return, slowly, cautiously, but it returns. Now let's be clear about what this doesn't mean. This doesn't mean you become cold or distant or emotionally unavailable. That's just another form of fear-based behavior, and she'll see right through it. This doesn't mean you stop caring or stop being affectionate or stop investing in the relationship. It means you stop doing those things from a place of desperation. You do them because you choose to, not because you're terrified of what happens if you don't. The energy behind the action is what matters. And women are exquisitely attuned to that energy. They can feel the difference between a man who's giving because he's abundant and a man who's giving because he's afraid. The first is attractive. The second is repellent. You also need to understand that respect and love are not the same thing. She might still love you even if she doesn't respect you. Love can persist out of habit, out of history, out of hope that things will change. But love without respect is toxic. It becomes resentment. It becomes contempt. It becomes a slow poisoning of both people. So if you're clinging to the fact that she still says she loves you, that she's still physically there, understand that it's not enough. You need both. And respect is actually the foundation. Without it, love curdles into something unrecognizable. Here's a truth that's going to make you uncomfortable. Part of why you lost her respect is because you needed her too much. Not wanted her, needed her. You made her responsible for your emotional stability, your sense of worth, your daily mood. And that's a crushing weight for anyone to carry. Nobody wants to be in a relationship with someone who will fall apart if they leave. It's not romantic. It's not devotion. It's hostage taking. And she felt it. Every time you got anxious when she didn't text back immediately. Every time you got insecure when she talked to another man, every time you needed reassurance that she still found you attractive, still wanted you, still chose you, all of that communicated the same message. I don't believe I'm enough, so I need you to constantly convince me otherwise. And that's exhausting. That's a full-time job nobody signed up for. The antidote is building a life that doesn't revolve around her, not as a manipulation tactic, but as a genuine reclamation of your autonomy. What did you care about before this relationship consumed you? What goals did you have? What friendships did you neglect? What hobbies did you abandon? Go back to those things, not because it'll make her jealous, though it might, but because you need them. You need a life that's full and meaningful and challenging, independent of her presence in it. Because when you have that, when you're genuinely engaged with your own existence, the neediness evaporates. You stop checking your phone every 30 seconds. You stop analyzing every word she says for hidden meaning. You stop living in a constant state of low-grade anxiety about the relationship status. And that shift, that return to yourself, is what creates the conditions for respect to grow again. Let's talk about communication for a moment, because this is where most men get it catastrophically wrong. They think more communication is always better. They think if they can just explain themselves clearly enough, if they can just have one more deep conversation, everything will click into place. But communication without self-respect is just noise. If you're explaining yourself from a defensive position, if you're trying to justify your existence or your choices or your feelings, you've already lost. Because the subtext of all that explaining is, please approve of me. Please validate that I'm okay. And that subtext is what she hears, regardless of the actual words. Contrast that with a man who communicates from a place of groundedness. He's not defending. He's not convincing. He's just informing. Here's how I see it. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's where my boundary is. No justification, no over-explanation, no apologizing for taking up space, just clarity. And if she disagrees, he listens, he considers, but he doesn't automatically defer. He weighs her perspective against his own internal compass, and then he makes a decision. And he's willing to let her be upset with that decision if necessary, because he understands that trying to make everyone happy all the time is a recipe for making no one happy, himself included. This is where boys and men diverge. A boy needs everyone to be okay with him. A man is okay with being misunderstood, disagreed with, even disliked, as long as he's living in integrity with himself. And women, on some instinctive level, recognize that difference immediately. It's not about being an asshole. It's not about being selfish or dismissive. It's about having an internal locus of control. It's about being self-referential instead of other-referential. And that quality, that centeredness, is what respect is built on. Now, some of you are thinking, but I tried being more assertive and she just got angry. Yeah, she probably did. Because sudden changes in behavior feel inauthentic, and they often are. If you've been a people pleaser for months or years, and then overnight you start acting like someone with boundaries, it's going to feel jarring. She's going to test whether it's real. She's going to push back harder to see if you collapse back into your old patterns. And if you do, you've just confirmed that the change was fake, that you're still the same reactive, approval-seeking person, just wearing a new costume. But if you hold steady, if you maintain your new way of being even through her resistance, eventually the testing stops. Eventually she recalibrates. Eventually she starts to trust that this is who you are now. But that only works if the change is genuine. If you're doing this as a strategy to get her back, it won't work. She'll smell the manipulation. She'll sense that you're still operating from the same place of fear and neediness, just with different tactics. The change has to be for you. You have to become this person because you're tired of being the old version, because you can't stand the idea of living one more day as someone who compromises himself for approval, because your self-respect matters more than any relationship outcome. And when that's truly your motivation, when you've genuinely detached from the result, that's when everything shifts, because you're finally free. Free from the prison of other people's opinions, free from the exhausting performance of trying to be enough, free to just exist as you are and let the chips fall where they may. Here's the part that's both terrifying and liberating. You might do all of this and still lose her. You might become the most grounded, self-respecting, boundaried version of yourself, and she might still walk away because maybe the damage is too deep. Maybe she's already checked out emotionally. Maybe she's met someone else. Maybe the version of you she fell in love with is so far removed from who you became that no amount of change can bridge that gap. And if that happens, it's going to hurt. It's going to feel like all this work was for nothing, but it wasn't, because you didn't do this work to get her back. You did it to get yourself back. And that version of you, the one with self-respect and boundaries and clarity, is going to be just fine, better than fine. He's going to build a life that doesn't depend on any one person's approval. And he's going to attract people who respect him from the start because he respects himself. This is the identity shift that has to happen. You're not a man trying to win back a woman's respect. You're a man reclaiming his own dignity. And if she wants to be part of that journey, she's welcome. But you're going either way. You're done negotiating your worth. You're done shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. You're done living like someone who's lucky to be tolerated. You're moving forward with or without her validation, with or without her presence, because your life is too valuable to spend it begging for scraps of approval from anyone, including her. And when you truly embody that, when it's not just an idea but a lived reality, you'll notice something. The anxiety disappears. The constant mental chatter about whether she's happy, whether she still wants you, whether you're doing enough, it just goes quiet, because you're no longer outsourcing your peace to someone else's shifting emotional state. You're generating it internally. And that makes you dangerous in the best possible way. Dangerous to mediocrity, dangerous to toxicity, dangerous to relationships that require you to be small, because you're simply not available for that anymore. So if you want her respect back, stop trying to get her respect back. Start respecting yourself so completely, so uncompromisingly, that her opinion becomes just one data point among many, not the single variable your entire existence hinges on. Start building a life so compelling, so aligned with your actual values, that you'd be genuinely okay if she decided it wasn't for her. Start showing up in the world like someone who has options, not because you're shopping around, but because you've remembered that your worth isn't determined by any one person's assessment of it. Do that, and one of two things will happen. Either she'll notice the shift and respect will start to rebuild, or she won't, and you'll be free to find someone who sees your value from the beginning. Either way, you win, because you're no longer trapped in the suffocating dynamic of begging someone to see you. You've become visible to yourself, and that's where all real change begins. If this resonated, if you felt something shift while listening to this, then subscribe, because this channel isn't about quick fixes or comfort. It's about the hard truths that actually create transformation. It's about building lives of discipline, clarity, and self-respect. It's about becoming men who don't need permission to exist fully. And if that's the path you're on, you're in the right place. Welcome.